our Secretariat, Mr. Speaker, and our members for the good job and the good support that you accorded our committee. Mr. Speaker, this finance bill is one of the most canvassed finance bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we did organize the public participation exercise, Mr. Speaker, which went all through for almost 10 days, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during that exercise, we informed Kenyans that the finance bill of 2020, the public participation exercise, which we were doing, Mr. Speaker, was not a public relations exercise, Mr. Speaker. It was a very serious exercise, Mr. Speaker. And I want to inform the public and Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, that we heard them. We have included their views in our recommendation, Mr. Speaker, which was tabled yesterday by the chairman, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank our members because we sat, Mr. Speaker, we sat sometimes late into the night, Mr. Speaker, and I can say, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, as a committee comprising both sides of the House, Mr. Speaker, we were 99.9 unanimous, Mr. Speaker, in our deliberations, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this House, Mr. Speaker, I want to say this House has already passed the budget estimates of 24-25, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, any member who voted for the budget estimate of 2024, because budget estimates are funded by the finance bill of 2024. So all of us, if we have supported the budget estimate of 2024, Mr. Speaker, we should rise to the occasion and support the finance bill of 2024. Mr. Speaker, when we went to the elections, we were given the terms of reference. One of them, Mr. Speaker, is we must stop borrowing. We must stop borrowing, Mr. Speaker. And to stop borrowing, Mr. Speaker, we must be able to generate our own revenue. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, even as we talk about protecting the Kenyans, which we have done, Mr. Speaker, we must also help our country to raise revenue so that we stop the shame of borrowing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to say, as I've said, the committee listened to the public participation exercise, and we have incorporated all the negative items, Mr. Speaker, which were in the bill. We have removed all of them, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, this House should unanimously support and vote for the bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to go to the specific issues which were mentioned in the bill. And this bill, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, Kenyans should note that the bill which was tabled in the House were proposals, Mr. Speaker. This House has the power to amend, to change. I could rather say, Mr. Speaker, those proposals, we can amend everything, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Kenyans should not fear. We are here to protect Kenyans. We are here to protect our country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about specific clauses. Mr. Speaker, this bill proposes to amend Income Tax Act, Mr. Speaker, the VAT Act, Mr. Speaker, the Excise Duty Act, Mr. Speaker, and also the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act, Mr. Speaker. On more specific issues, Mr. Speaker, the bill proposes to introduce what we call the significant presence tax, Mr. Speaker, which actually targets all the international organizations that are doing business within our country, mainly on online system, Mr. Speaker. They are making money, they are getting money to their country, but you are getting less, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we must make sure that everyone who does business in the country contributes to our economy, contributes to our tax income, Mr. Speaker, and therefore the committee supports the introduction of what we call the significant tax presence system, Mr. Speaker, so that we make sure we tax everyone who's doing business in our country and contribute to our economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the law as established now gives our companies 5 years to recover their tax, what we call the tax foreign exchange losses, Mr. Speaker. The bill proposes to reduce that provision from 5 years to 3 years, Mr. Speaker. When we consider the opinions of the public, Mr. Speaker, we did agree, and we will be moving the necessary amendments that, Mr. Speaker, we must maintain the status quo, meaning that we did not agree that we should reduce it. It is good for the public, for our companies, Mr. Speaker, to be given sufficient time to recover their losses, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we shall be introducing recommendations to delete that section, Mr. Speaker, which was proposing to reduce recovery of foreign losses, exchange losses, from 5 years to 3 years. Mr. Speaker, the income tax, the bill proposes to introduce what we call motor vehicle tax, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say this was the most contested section of the bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, every presenter who came to the committee, they were opposed. Mr. Speaker, when we read the Income Tax Act, I think clause 3, Mr. Speaker, says income tax will be charged on income of individuals and companies, Mr. Speaker. We tried to check whether this tax called motor vehicle tax, Mr. Speaker, fits into the income tax definition, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, our honest opinion, Mr. Speaker, was that, one, it was misplaced, because a motor vehicle tax is like it's not even an income, it's like an asset tax, Mr. Speaker. So if we tax your asset today, your car, tomorrow we'll introduce what we call land tax. Tomorrow we'll introduce what we call house tax, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we should remain within the law. And therefore we conclude that these taxes are not fit into the definition of income, and therefore the committee was unanimous in recommending that we must remove this tax, Mr. Speaker. And it was going to make Kenyans suffer, Mr. Speaker. So therefore, the Kenyans who told us about the motor vehicle tax, I want to inform you that we listened to you, and we are going to remove it, Mr. Speaker, so that we reduce the cost of living in this country. So, Mr. Speaker, those people are relying on this section to make sure that, to talk about the finance bill in the pipeline, Mr. Speaker. We have recommended removal. So people must relax, Mr. Speaker. We are removing it. Kenyans should relax, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bill under Income Tax Act proposal also proposes to introduce what we call advance pricing agreement between the KRA and the multinational, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, multinationals operate a very complex financial system, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes they want to do what we call the tax planning, Mr. Speaker, so that as a country we lose finally. But, Mr. Speaker, we want to make sure that everyone contributes their fair share of tax. And therefore, we support what we call the advanced pricing agreement for enhancement of revenues for multinational entities, Mr. Speaker, so that they contribute their fair share of tax, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill proposes to increase the non-taxable amount of pensions, Mr. Speaker, from 20,000 per month, Mr. Speaker, to 30,000 per month, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, all those of us, all the Kenyans who are retired, Mr. Speaker, they must be cushioned, Mr. Speaker. They have supported the country for well over 60 years, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, you don't tax somebody up to their retirement. We are proposing that we make sure we cushion them, Mr. Speaker, so that the amount that we are recommending that we increase the tax deductible amount from 20,000 to 30,000, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
your time is up, Benja. 1 minute to wind up.
1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, I've given you 1 minute.
Okay.
Finish up.
Mr. Speaker, on eco levy, Mr. Speaker, the committee was of the view that we must protect the local manufacturers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bill proposes to have what you call eco levy to protect the environment from both local manufacturers and imported goods, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we were unanimous in saying that we have to support our manufacturers. We only levy the eco levy on the finished manufactured goods, Mr. Speaker. Our local manufacturers, we have what we call Mr. Speaker, our local manufacturers, Mr. Speaker, have arrangements to protect the environment which have been agreed with NEMA, Mr. Speaker. So the levy will only be on foreign finished products, and Mr. Speaker, those goods which we cannot manufacture in Kenya. Mr. Speaker, I second and I support. I ask.
Order, honorable members, take your seats. Order, take your seats. Honorable Cheng. Honorable members, I now propose the question, which is that the Finance Bill, National Assembly Bill number 30 of 2024, be now read a second time. Opio and I. Yes. Okay.